April 25th, 1945. The Oval Office, White House, Washington, WWII. Rain taps the windows in small, impatient bursts, like fingers drumming on a desk. The spring light is thin and gray, and it makes the room feel smaller than it should. President Harry S. Truman sits forward in his chair, jacket buttoned, shoulders squared, as if posture alone can keep the world from sliding off its axis. He has been president for less than 2 weeks. Outside these walls, Europe is still burning in pockets. Berlin is being strangled. In the Pacific, maps are pinned with red arrows and island names that sound like curses. The Marine Corps and the Army are already measuring the beaches of Japan in blood. A knock, then the door opens. Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson enters with the careful weight of a man carrying something too heavy for his hands. Behind him is Brigadier General Leslie R. Groves, barrel-chested, uniform immaculate, eyes alert as a sentry. Groves does not look like a man who deals in theory. He looks like a man who builds railroads and fortresses, and who expects them to work. Stimson's voice is low, formal, and deliberate. Mr. President, there is a project, begun years ago, authorized at the highest level, known to very few. Its existence itself has been secret. Truman watches them. He has spent most of his life around men who talk plainly when things matter. He can smell the difference between routine and history. Groves places a folder on the desk. The paper inside is dense, typed, numbered. It is not a speech. It is not a report for the public. It is a warning. Stimson begins. Within 4 months, he says, we will in all probability have completed the most terrible weapon ever known in human history. Truman's eyes lift. 1 bomb, not a raid, not a 1,000-plane night over Hamburg, not a fleet of B-29s grinding the sky into a single roar. 1 bomb could destroy a whole city. For a moment, the words do not land as meaning. They are too large. You can feel Truman's mind reaching for something familiar, a scale he understands. He commanded artillery in the last war. He knows what high explosive does to men. He has seen what a shell can do to a gun crew, to a horse, to a wooden farmhouse. He has watched the ground open and swallow a body. But this is not that. Groves explains the mechanism as simply as a man can explain a sun in a box. A chain reaction, the splitting of atoms, energy released in a fraction of a second. It is physics dragged out of chalkboards and forced into steel and wiring and carefully machined parts. Truman's face hardens. He does not interrupt with small talk. He asks the questions that matter. How soon? How many? How are we delivering it? Groves answers like a logistics officer. A special unit is being trained. Aircraft are being modified. The weapon will be heavy. The mission will be singular. It will not be like dropping conventional bombs. It will be 1 plane, 1 drop, 1 flash. Stimson moves to consequences. The weapon is not only blast, it is heat. A firestorm kind of heat. Heat that can ignite a city from its center outward. And then the part they struggle to put into ordinary language. Radiation, a word that sounds clinical, harmless, like a tool in a hospital. But here it means sickness that arrives after the explosion, invisible and delayed. It means men who survive the first second may still die days later. It means the weapon does not stop killing when the smoke clears. Truman sits very still. You can almost hear him turning the words over, not as science, but as policy, as power, as a new shape of war. He does not react like a man being told he has a bigger hammer. He reacts like a man being told the rules of gravity have changed. Stimson presses on. The United States, he says, is in a position of controlling the resources for this weapon for a time, but not forever. Secrecy cannot hold indefinitely. Other nations will get there, maybe sooner than anyone wants to believe, And then a sentence hangs in the air like a bell that has been struck. Modern civilization might be completely destroyed. Truman's mouth tightens. His gaze shifts to the map corner of the room, the faint outline of oceans and continents, as if he is seeing them differently. Cities are no longer just dots. They are targets that can vanish. The meeting ends with handshakes that feel mechanical. Stimson and Groves leave the room, and the door closes softly behind them. The rain continues its patient tapping. Truman remains seated, staring at the folder as if it might move. That night, the new president reaches for his pen and writes the thought the briefing has burned into him. Not for an audience, not for history, for himself, because it is too large to keep inside, an explosive great enough to destroy the whole world. Early May, 1945. Washington, D.C., a secure conference room inside the War Department. The air smells faintly of cigarette smoke and paper glue. A blackout curtain is drawn even in daylight, more habit than necessity. Like the room itself refuses to trust the sun. Truman sits at the head of a long table, hat in his hands for a moment before he sets it down, as if he is placing something personal out of reach. Across from him are men who look nothing like the generals he has spent the last week studying. No ribbons, no polished boots. One wears a rumpled suit. Another has ink stains on his fingers. They carry slide charts and clipped folders, the quiet tools of people who fight with equations. Stimson is there again, rigid, composed. Groves stands behind the scientists like a guard dog, arms folded, jaw clenched, and then the explanation begins. Slowly at first, because they are trying to translate a universe into American English. They do not begin with morality. They begin with effects, a single weapon. They tell him, releases energy by splitting atoms. In the first instant, a shock wave expands outward faster than any storm. Buildings do not simply catch fire. They are crushed, unmade. Windows become knives. Brick becomes dust. Steel girders twist like hot wire. Then the heat. Not ordinary heat. A pulse, a flash, like someone igniting the surface of the world. Skin exposed for an instant can blister, char. Fabrics ignite. Paper curls. Oil burns. The city becomes a field of scattered flames that join hands, pulling air inward, feeding on oxygen like an engine. A firestorm. Truman's eyes narrow as the words stack up. His mind keeps reaching for comparison and finding none that fits. One scientist clears his throat and tries another angle. Imagine, Mr. President, the center of a city. One point, and everything within a certain radius is destroyed. Past that, severe damage. Past that, burns. Past that, glass and debris and chaos. It is not like a single bomb in the old sense. It is like the city has been hit by a giant hammer and then lit with a blowtorch. And then the word they hesitate on again. Radiation. They explain it carefully, almost apologetically. Invisible energy that poisons the body. Some will die quickly from the blast and heat. Others will survive the first minute and still die later. Without wounds you can see. Hair falls out. Fever rises. Bleeding begins. The weapon keeps killing after the sound is gone. Truman does not flinch, but his knuckles go pale where his hands grip the table edge. He's not squeamish. He's something else. He is measuring. He looks at the charts, at the circles drawn around an imaginary ground zero, at numbers that pretend human beings can be counted like fence posts. Finally he speaks, voice low and tight. You are telling me one bomb can do this to a city? No one answers with drama. They answer with fact. Yes, Mr. President. He leans back, breathes once through his nose, and his gaze goes to Stimson, then Groves, then back to the men in rumpled suits. There is a short silence, and in that silence you can feel Truman grasp what matters most. This is not a bigger artillery shell. This is not a new plane or a better torpedo. This is a different category of warfare. He says it out loud, as if naming it gives him control. This is the most terrible weapon in the history of the world. The scientist nearest to him nods, relieved in a grim way that the president has understood without needing to be convinced. Groves watches Truman's face the way a man watches a fuse, waiting for the next spark. Truman's next words come slower. If we use it, it has got to be used to end the war. He taps the table once, a small sound in a locked room. We are not going to drop this thing unless it saves American lives and ends it. Stimson's posture loosens just slightly, as if he has been holding his breath since the door shut. The scientists shift their papers. The meeting continues, turning to timing, delivery, targets that will matter later. Though no one says the word targets as bluntly as that. But the key moment has already happened. Truman has been shown a new kind of power, and he has answered it, not with awe, but with a sentence that tastes like iron, the most terrible weapon in the history of the world. June 18th, 1945. The White House. Cabinet Room. Washington, D.C. The summer heat presses against the windows. The fans turn lazily, pushing warm air across a polished wood. Truman sits with a pencil in his hand, surrounded by men whose uniforms and suits carry the weight of campaigns, convoys, and casualty lists. General George C. Marshall speaks in a steady, controlled voice. Admiral William D. Leahy watches like a man who has seen too many wars and trusts none of them. Maps are spread out, the Japanese home islands outlined in ink that feels too neat for what it represents. They talk about invasion, not as an idea, but as a schedule. Kyushu first, then Honshu, beaches, airfields, supply dumps, the kind of planning that turns coastlines into math. Marshall points to likely resistance, to terrain and weather. Another officer mentions the fanatic defense on Iwo Jima. Okinawa, the way Japanese units fought until they were simply gone. Truman listens, and he does not need anyone to tell him what this means. He commanded men once. You can never unsee a field after the shells fall. Casualty figures are discussed with the careful hesitation of men trying not to sound like gamblers. No one claims certainty. They speak in ranges, in possibilities. But the ranges are large enough to make the pencil in Truman's hand feel heavy. He asks direct questions. How many divisions? How long? What happens if Japan does not surrender after the first landing? Marshall answers honestly. The war could drag on. The fighting could be severe. The enemy is still armed, still organized, still willing to die in place. When the meeting ends, Truman stands and walks away from the table, not toward the door, but toward the window, looking out across the lawn as if the grass might offer a simpler answer. Behind him, the room empties. Footsteps fade. Papers are collected. The map edges curl slightly in the heat. Truman remains at the window. The words from the scientists return, uninvited. One bomb, a city erased by blast and heat. Men dying later from something you cannot see. Now those words collide with Marshall's maps and the grim arithmetic of an invasion. Truman feels the two futures pulling at him. In one, American boys climb out of landing craft under machine gun fire. In the other, a city becomes a flash. That evening, he meets with Stimson again. Private, the Secretary of War's face drawn but determined. Stimson speaks about the urgency of ending the war before the Soviet Union moves deeper into Asia, before the world shifts in ways no one can control. He speaks about the weapon as a means to force surrender, fast, before more cities burn under conventional bombing, before more prisoners die, before more families receive telegrams. Truman sits with his elbows on the desk. For a moment, you can almost hear the buzz of distant traffic, the low hum of Washington carrying on as if the planet is not changing in secret rooms. He asks the question that is not scientific. not military. If we use it, will it end the war? Stimson does not promise. He cannot. But he believes it may. A few days later, James F. Burns, sharp and confident, speaks with Truman in a tone that suggests the United States is not just trying to win, but to shape what comes after. Burns talks about leverage, about diplomacy, about how the world will look at America when it holds a weapon no one else has. Truman does not argue. He absorbs. He feels the presidency settling onto him like a coat that is too heavy, but cannot be removed. And yet, in the quiet moments, when he is alone with his thoughts, the scientist's description keeps returning in the same brutal order. Blast. Heat. Radiation. Not a bigger bomb. A new world. In late June, a message comes across the channels from the farthest corner of secrecy. The project is nearing completion. The men in the desert are almost ready to test the thing they built. Truman reads the update once, then again, and the pencil finally leaves his hand. It rolls slowly across the desk until it taps the folder's edge and stops, like time itself pausing. Soon, he will not be discussing possibilities. He will be holding a choice. July 16th, 1945. Jornada del Muerto Desert, New Mexico. Before dawn, the sand is cold under boots. The sky is a deep, bruised blue, with a thin line of lighter color on the horizon where morning tries to break through. Men in goggles and dark glasses wait behind barriers and in bunkers, faces turned toward a metal tower that looks too small to hold what it holds. A countdown voice crackles over radios. Numbers fall away one by one. Then the desert becomes daylight, not sunrise, not lightning, something whiter, harsher, like the sky itself has been torn open. The air heats instantly. The shock wave follows, a hard slap that rattles teeth and punches at ribs even from miles away. A rising column climbs into the heavens, swelling into a giant shape that no one wants to name because naming makes it real. Some men shout without meaning to. Some laugh in disbelief. Some just stare, mouths open, their bodies forgetting to breathe. In that instant, the weapon stops being a proposal and becomes a fact. Far away from the desert, the fact races east in coded messages that read like ordinary signals to anyone who is not inside the circle. July 17th, 1945. Potsdam, Germany. A villa near the Sicilienhof Palace. Truman stands near a window, the air thick with European summer. The room carrying the smell of old wood and cigarette smoke. Potsdam is a conference of victors, but it does not feel like victory. It feels like the world is being cut and measured. He is surrounded by briefcases, interpreters, maps of a shattered continent. Stalin is nearby in another room, calm and unreadable, a man whose smile never reaches his eyes. Churchill is still the British Prime Minister today, but elections back home are changing that, and everyone can sense the ground moving. A military aide enters with a small slip of paper and a look that tries to be neutral. Truman recognizes the look anyway. It is the look of a man delivering something that can tilt the table. The aide hands it over. Truman reads once, then again. The words are coded, but the meaning is clear. The test succeeded. The bomb works. For a moment he feels as if the room has grown larger, as if there is suddenly more air. His shoulders lift, not in joy, but in the strange relief of a man who has been carrying uncertainty and is now carrying something heavier, but solid. He folds the message carefully and slides it into his pocket. The paper is small, but it might as well be a brick. When he steps into the next session, he looks at Stalin differently, and he can feel it. The Soviets have promised to enter the war against Japan, and Truman has wanted that help, feared it, needed it, and now, with that paper in his pocket, he is no longer sure how the balance will land. Stimson is not in Potsdam, but his influence is. So is Groves. in the form of reports and cables and men who speak in clipped phrases. Truman meets privately with his closest advisors and listens to what the success means. The weapon is real. The delivery is being prepared. The Special Air Unit is readying its crews. Japan is still fighting. The conversations circle the same hard point. The bomb can force surrender. The bomb can end the war quickly. The bomb can also open a door that cannot be closed. Truman goes for a walk in the garden paths outside the villa. Gravel crunches under his shoes. The air is warm. Birds call from trees that survived the war. Somewhere in the distance, Berlin lies in ruins. Somewhere farther still, Japanese cities are being burned by conventional bombs. Night after night, the old kind of horror still in full motion. He stops, alone for a moment, and you can almost see the thought moving through him. If this ends the war, it saves lives. If this becomes normal, it changes everything. He stands there, hand briefly touching the pocket where the message rests. Not because he needs to check it is real, because he needs to remember that it is. Then he turns back toward the villa, toward the conference rooms, toward the decisions that will follow him for the rest of his life. Late July, 1945. Potsdam, Germany. Inside the Sizilienhof complex, the conference rooms are hot, crowded, and tense. Cigarette smoke hangs in layers. Translators sit ready, eyes flicking between faces. Every phrase is weighed, every pause noticed. Outside, gardeners keep trimming hedges as if Europe is not being redrawn with words. Truman sits at a long table, posture straight, expression controlled. Across the room, Joseph Stalin listens with the stillness of a man who never shows his hand. Winston Churchill is there at first, then replaced as Britain's election results settle, and Clement Attlee takes the seat. Quieter, businesslike, different faces, same burden. The war is ending in one hemisphere, raging in another. Truman's mind keeps slipping, not to Germany, but to the Pacific. Japan has not surrendered. Reports describe fierce defense, a country preparing to fight to the last village. American planners talk about invasion dates as if they are train timetables. And Truman can still hear the scientists describing blast, heat, radiation, as if a city were a chalk mark you erase. When the Potsdam Declaration is drafted, Truman leans into its language. It warns Japan of prompt and utter destruction if it continues the war. It does not say atomic. It does not say radiation. It cannot. Not yet. But the threat is there, embedded like a blade under cloth. The declaration is sent. Japan does not immediately yield. In the days that follow, Truman receives cables, updates, intelligence summaries, all of them wrapped in the same question. Will Japan surrender without invasion? Will it accept terms? Will the shock of the declaration be enough? Each time the answer comes back, it is not enough. And so the machinery moves forward. B-29 aircraft are being readied on an island base in the Western Pacific. Crews train with an almost ritual precision, learning a mission unlike any other. The bomb itself is handled with a kind of reverence and fear. Men who build it speak in lowered voices, as if loud words might trigger it. Truman does not see those preparations directly. He sees them through paper and cables, through the careful language of officers who know they are writing for the president. But he feels them. Then comes another meeting, smaller, tighter. The kind of meeting where the room seems to shrink around what is being said. Advisors speak about timing, targets, and the psychological shock needed to compel surrender. They talk about demonstrating power. They talk about ending the war. They talk about avoiding a long invasion and the casualties that could climb into the hundreds of thousands. Truman's face stays hard. He is not smiling. He is not triumphant. He is listening. And the listening itself is a decision forming. When a pause opens, Truman speaks. His voice is plain, Midwestern. the voice of a man who prefers straight lines and clear words. It is a weapon to be used in war. Then, a second sentence, sharper, like a nail driven into wood. But I have told the Secretary of War it must not be used on women and children. The room goes quiet. It is not an order that can be obeyed in any perfect way, because everyone in that room understands what a city is. Women and children are in cities. Old men and factory workers, nurses, clerks, people eating breakfast, people carrying water, people trying to sleep through air raid sirens that have already become routine. Truman knows this too. That is what makes the sentence heavy. It is not innocent speaking. It is a man trying to draw a line in a world that has stopped respecting lines. He continues, pushing himself to be specific, because the mind tries to hide behind generalities. If we use it, it must be used against a military target. The words military target are spoken carefully, as if the phrase can reshape reality. The advisors nod, some quickly, some slowly, because they know what he is reaching for. He is trying to frame the bomb as an instrument aimed at war-making capacity, not at helplessness. He is trying to keep a moral anchor in a storm. The discussions move on. Targets are described in terms of industrial value, troop concentrations, psychological impact. But the sentence Truman spoke does not go away. It sits in the room like an uninvited guest, not on women and children. And yet, the plain truth keeps pressing in from all sides. A bomb that destroys a city cannot pick and choose. Late at night, in his quarters, Truman writes again, privately, the kind of writing a man does when he is arguing with himself. He recalls the scientists, their sober voices explaining blast and heat and radiation. He recalls the invasion maps. He recalls the telegrams that will come if the war continues. He tries to hold two images at once. American boys landing under fire. A city erased in an instant. In the end, the decision is not delivered with a dramatic flourish. It is delivered the way history often turns, with signatures, approvals, and the quiet movement of paper. The planes will fly, the bomb will be dropped. And Truman's sentence, spoken in a smoky room in Potsdam, will follow him into the years ahead, because it reveals what he understood in that moment. This was not simply a larger bomb. It was a fundamentally new kind of warfare. August 6, 1945. Hiroshima, Japan. Morning, a clear sky, thin clouds, a city waking into routine shaped by war. People move along streets and riverbanks, carrying bags, bicycles, lunch tins. Air raid warnings have become a rhythm of life, and this morning the sirens are not screaming. The sky holds a single aircraft high above, silver and small, the kind of detail the eye notices and then dismisses. Then the light. It is not a flash like a camera. It is a white violence that seems to arrive everywhere at once. Shadows are stamped onto walls. Skin exposed turns instantly into pain. The air itself becomes a weapon. The blast wave follows, and the city breaks. Roofs lift and fold. Wood splinters. Concrete shatters. Fires bloom as if planted. A wind rises that pulls oxygen into the flame, and the flame answers by growing hungry. And then, in the hours and days that follow, the invisible part begins. People who walked away from the first moment begin to weaken, vomiting, fever, bleeding, a sickness with no obvious enemy. The world changes in one morning. August 6th, 1945. Washington, D.C., the White House. Truman is not looking at a map when the news is prepared for the public. He is dealing with the machinery of a presidency at war. But when the message arrives, when he knows the bomb has been used, it carries a weight that no victory cable has ever had. He has already approved. He has already set this in motion. Now it is real in the only way that matters, not as circles on paper, not as test fire in a desert, real in flesh and burned stone and silence. A statement is issued. The language is controlled, deliberate, aimed at ending the war, aimed at Japan's leaders, aimed at America's people who have been bleeding across the Pacific. It speaks of a new weapon. It warns of further destruction if surrender does not come. In private, the human cost does not arrive in full detail at first. Early reports are numbers, estimates, the kind of information war always feeds into capitals. But even those numbers are enough to make the room feel colder. 3 days later, August 9th, another bomb is used on Nagasaki. The second flash proving the first was not an accident, not a singular event, but a new capability. Now the pressure on Japan becomes unbearable. Now the idea of continuing the war begins to crack inside their leadership. Messages move through channels. The language of surrender begins to form. August 10th to 14th, 1945. Washington and across the Pacific. Truman's days compress into briefings, cables, and decisions that feel like they happen in the space between breaths. Advisors argue about terms. Japan's response is parsed word by word. The question of the emperor's role becomes a hinge point. Truman thinks about the invasion plans again. He thinks about the young men who would have died on beaches and in mountain passes. He thinks about the prisoners, the civilians under blockade, the cities already burned by conventional firebombing. He thinks about Hiroshima and Nagasaki not as names, but as proof that the weapon does what the scientists said it would do: blast, heat, radiation. He realizes that the bomb is now not only a tool to end this war, but a presence that will shape every war after, whether anyone wants it or not. August 14th, 1945. Washington, D.C. The news comes through. Japan will accept surrender terms. In the city streets, people will celebrate. There will be noise, confetti, dancing, a nation releasing years of fear. In Truman's world, the reaction is quieter, not joy exactly, not simple relief, something complicated that sits behind the eyes. The war is ending, but the method will haunt the peace. In the weeks that follow, the full reports arrive: photographs, medical descriptions, accounts of burns and firestorms and sickness. Truman reads what he can, and what he cannot read is read to him in summaries. He learns, in detail, what it means when scientists describe a weapon. He learns the distance between a technical explanation and a human reality. And then comes the shift from wartime decision to peacetime consequence. Truman begins speaking about control, about responsibility, about the need to prevent this from becoming common. He understands, perhaps more sharply than anyone in the world at that moment, that America has opened a door to a kind of power that no president, no emperor, no king in history has ever held. He thinks back to the first briefing, those early days in April, when Stimson and Groves came into the Oval Office and described a single bomb capable of destroying an entire city. He remembers the way his mind seized on it immediately. Not a bigger bomb, a new kind of warfare. And he remembers the sentence he wrote to himself, the one that arrived instinctively because there was no other way to capture it. An explosive great enough to destroy the whole world. That, in the end, is what Truman said when scientists explained what the atomic bomb would do to a city, not in a dramatic public proclamation, not as a slogan, but as a private recognition of scale. A weapon that could end a war. A weapon that could end a world